Hi, so I'm back with the second part of this video, and we're talking about history and memory. And I want to talk a little bit about remembering 9/11. You're going to do an activity that will be based on your own memories or memories that your family has told you about 9/11. And before we talk about that activity, I want to talk a little bit about what historian Emily Rosenberg talks about. And she's written a book called A Date Which Will Live about Pearl Harbor in American memory. And she calls memory something that she labels remembered history. So remembered gives us this idea of something that's been taken apart and kind of reassembled, so put back together. So she says in America, the media shapes and reshapes the social remembering and the forgetting around historical events. So what the media chooses to focus on tends to be what we collectively remember. What the media does not focus on or forgets, we tend to forget or not carry with us into future memories. So she says that the media literally remembers or reassembles, you could say, the past and provides the quote unquote texture of memories. So in particularly, you may think back about 9/11 and the multiple times that we as citizens of the US saw the media and saw TV and news outlets show the planes hitting the Trade Center over and over again. So that kind of imagery stays with us. And Rosenberg really is interested in looking at how the past shapes the stories. So how did we receive the story of 9/11 and what happened to us? We received it based on historical knowledge of other events that had happened to us, in particularly World War II, the bombing of Pearl Harbor in World War II. So that event kind of frames how we understand 9/11. And even though these events are not the same events, we use some of the same words and some of the same phrases to understand what happened. So think about how culturally familiar stories shape understanding and memories of the past. And so when Rosenberg writes her book, A Date Which Will Live, she talks about remembering as a form of forgetting. And that remembering and forgetting are actually part of the same process. So the information that is included and the information that is left out, that's a filtering out process. And she also says that the present moment is unlike the memory of it. And I want you to kind of think about that phrase and think about memories that you have and how the present moment is not like the memory of it. So things change and memories change. And that's something we want to keep in mind as we're doing the work of a historian, analyzing other people's memories and other people's recounting of events that they witnessed. And Barbara Gimblett has said that memory is not reclaimed, it is produced. So how do we produce memories? Is a memory something factual, something that we know 100% happened, or is it something that it is produced, that we could think that we have a memory, but has it been changed and shaped, and have we remembered parts of it and forgotten others? So I think these are really important concepts for you to keep with you. We experience the present through the lens of the past, and we shape our understanding of the past through the lens of the present. That is a quote from Emily Rosenberg. And actually there's a little typo here. We'll put that in there. So we experience the present through the lens of the past, and we shape our understanding of the past through the lens of the present. And during the 1990s, Pearl Harbor became an increasingly visible icon. And so Pearl Harbor itself was built on this past body of knowledge of events that had happened. Remember the Alamo, remember the Maine. So the bombing, the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. So things like that shaped understanding of present time events at the time of Pearl Harbor. So past events were shaping the present. And in similar manner, Pearl Harbor, our understanding of it, a day of infamy, remembering this day of infamy, shaped how we understood 9/11. So where did the words we use come from? I remember. Often people say, I remember that day, that what happened on 9/11, the treachery, it was a day of infamy. These were words that were used in papers and in the news media. It was a stab in the back. America was caught by surprise. The phrase ground zero, that was a phrase that had been historically tied to the event in Pearl Harbor. And so ground zero today for this generation, your generation, may mean 9/11, but previous generations, it had a different meaning. We're going to look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt's speech, his Day of Infamy speech that he gave the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, he has multiple drafts of his speech, and we can see how he changed the words that he used. In the opening sentence, he changes world history to infamy. So instead of a day that will live in world history, which doesn't have as much punch maybe to it, we have a day that will live in infamy. And that's a phrase that really kind of stayed with us. So analyzing a speech like this is really important, where we see how he's constructing the memory of an event as he writes. And those words become so powerful and so meaningful. And here's more of his speech. The activity I'll have you do, there's actually a link to it so you can read this a little more clearly. Now, when people are doing popular and professional history, they rely on these written and visual artifacts. And they tend to use the words that we're familiar with, and these words become repeated and passed down. So how do popular and professional histories, both the written history and visual, interact and blur with other forms of remembrance? So what other ways do we have of remembering events, of passing knowledge on? Now, in recent generations, cable TV, that's kind of passe. I don't think we really use the phrase cable TV. That's more my generation. But now we have the internet, and there's pretty much unlimited amounts of sources that you can go to find your news, to find out about what's happened. Film, when film was introduced, that was really a new way for people to see visually what was happening. Again, like I just mentioned, the internet, we've got oral interviews, so you have those firsthand accounts of people that witnessed an event. Although an oral interview could take place during the time of the event, it could take place years after. So how would that change a person's interpretation of an event if they were telling it right after they had seen it, or if they were telling it years later? So there's lots of different ways of remembering. And it all comes down to the power of story. And story is really what the focus of this semester is. We are all historians this semester, and we are all telling our story of American history from 1900 to the present. So story is a very powerful thing. And so are firsthand accounts. Now, why do you think those firsthand accounts carry so much power. The idea of I remember, I saw, I was there. A lot of times because they're raw and unfiltered, they're something that kind of comes from the gut, from this emotion of being in the presence of this powerful event or experience. And it requires us as listeners to take in different perspectives, because we cannot discount the other person's story. We can't dismiss it out of hand and say, oh, well, you really don't know what you're talking about, or this isn't what I expected to hear, so I'm not going to entertain this point of view. We are required to listen to this different perspective because this person is a witness, was there, and does have a story to tell. So we really need to have empathy, and we need to listen to other perspectives. I've got a few, I've actually have 2 links at the bottom of your weekly materials, where if you have some extra time and you want to listen, there is this Vimeo video on the class of 9/11, which gives some really important firsthand accounts of students that were in class right around the corner the day the World Trade Centers were hit. And I've also got a little snippet from This American Life, which talks about the aftermath of 9/11 and how it really divided the Arab American community, or it was very divisive between people living in the Arab American community and other people in the area at the time, that really began to focus on kind of this discriminatory view of Arabs after 9/11. So it's USA, me SA. I think that's an important clip to listen to if you have time. Now I want you to think about who controls the narrative. Who gets to tell the story? Who gets to repeat the story and to let us as listeners in on the story? Is it firsthand witnesses? Does the government control the narrative? Should the government control the narrative? Should private institutions control? What about pressure groups, certain lobby groups that want you to hear a certain message? Do they control the narrative? Should they control the narrative? What does the media do? It's the matrix that collects and circulates all of the information that we're exposed to. That's an important key thing to remember, thinking about who controls this narrative. And what do you think? Is it true or false? Oral history interviews seek to pursue a specific agenda and gather facts by asking a set of pointed questions to a group of people with the same experience. And you can pause the video here and take a look at this question and really think about it. Oral history interviews seek to pursue a specific agenda and gather facts by asking a set of pointed questions to a group of people with the same experience. What do you think? Can we trust oral history? I think oral history is definitely important. And here's a nice quote by Cicero that you can take a look at. And again, I want to reiterate the power of story. It's compelling, it's honest, it's complex, it's inspiring. Eyewitness accounts offer a unique perspective. In the case of 9/11, they offer details that can only be known by those who experienced them. But also remember that perceptions are not always accurate, but they are a kind of truth. So there's a tension in this eyewitness account, these oral presentations, the ways that we pass along information of an event. There's a tension built in. They're not always accurate, but they're getting to a certain truth that we may not have access to if we don't pay attention to these eyewitness accounts. And this video is about to come to an end. I have about 15 minutes on these, so I'm going to stop here, but certainly pause the video and take a look at this slide on fact versus fiction. I'm just going to upload a brief summary video here at the end and go over the weekly materials on Blackboard.